Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Apologies for being just a couple of minutes late. I was thinking about changing my outfit like they do at the Oscars, but I couldn't find anything environmentally appropriate to wear. I hope everyone has grabbed some lunch and a cuppa. No one has brought me mine yet, but that they're raring to go for this third panel of the day, which is called Everything Needs Diversity, Ensuring Social and Economic Robustness. So it's a look at the importance of diversity in everything. And those of you who know me will know that I absolutely love a diversity discussion in all forms. So let's get straight into it. So let me introduce our panel today. So we've got Roland Bull, who is Head of Rural Investment at Bidwells, Monica von Schmalensee, who is Senior Partner and Architect at White Architecture, and Olade Obo, who is Director of Partnership at First Base. So I think when people talk about diversity from a sustainability point of view, our minds immediately go to biodiversity, which they should, and we'll definitely be discussing that here. But we've also learned, some of us more recently than others, that diversity in absolutely everything, in business models, in design, in leadership, and in the environment is really important and always leads to better performance. So I guess I'd really like to start this conversation with you, Roland, and ask what biodiversity in the built environment can teach us about the sustainability of real estate, not just from that environmental point of view, but from a business sustenance, a business sustainability point of view.
Okay. I guess it's an area that, we've seen huge change or are witnessing huge change in at the moment. Obviously, historically, we've seen developers engaged on that agenda, primarily to the extent that they need to address issues on particular sites. I think the biggest change we've seen recently, not only in terms of public policy driving the need for enhanced environmental outcomes, but particularly the recognition that actually biodiversity, as one aspect of broader sustainability, does have tangible financial value, both in terms of the outcomes on specific built projects, but also now as a sort of emerging private market for investment as well. So as I say, that to me is the exciting thing, is where we can really start seeing tangible financial value associated with improved environmental outcomes.
Fantastic. And Olade, is that something that rings true at First Base as well? Do you look at diversity from a sustainability point of view in many different forms?
Definitely. I think a few years ago, it was probably not the top of many people's agenda, but I think much more so. I think certainly in the past 18 months, it is right at the top of the agenda. It's definitely coming from not just from our investors, but interestingly also from that end user. We're getting residents and business owners saying, this is a real priority for me. It's helping me to recruit better, because actually, the quality of people who want to work for me now have this as a critical factor in terms of who they want to work for. From people who want to live there are saying, I want to do more, and the home or the environment that I live or work in has to meet the values that I support. And as a result, people are willing to pay a bit more for that. So certainly it's become top of our agenda. For example, we are working on a city centre scheme in the middle of Bristol, very dense, very urban, and you're not going to get a load of parks there. But we have looked at how on earth how are we going to push that sustainability agenda much more. We are now delivering, I think it's over 100 plant species on this scheme. And that not only improves quality of life, improves the air quality there, it brings people into the scheme to do much more than just come into a building. Actually, it becomes part of that environment that they don't currently have, because it is quite a dense urban location. So absolutely, I think it's top of our agenda.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Monica, from a design perspective, this must be something that you're seeing more and more as well.
Absolutely, and I think it's the way you have posed the question. I think is quite interesting, because since we work now more and more as architects, planners, and designers, we have to use all kinds of skills, and that means not only the designing skills but also the skills within the environmental business, or the strategies around the environmental issues. So to be able to create that kind of and the need to have really diversity in the built environment. I think it's interesting if you say, if we don't have diversity, what kind of city then will we have? The opposite. And I think that is also a very good answer to, we don't like to have areas to be too gentrified. We would like to have those areas that are mixed use, with different kind of mixed use, mixed income, and that is really a diversity in the built environment. So I think by saying non-diversity, I think then we can get even closer to what we mean by the importance of the diversity in the built environment.
I think that's really interesting, actually, and something I've never thought of, trying to visualize what the built environment would look like if we didn't have any kind of diversity in it. How bland this world in which we live would be. Heading back towards sort of the biodiversity question, and particularly in these times when we are seeing towns and cities almost rewild themselves because we're not destroying the environments going through them. Do you think that what we're seeing now in terms of allowing nature to diversify our areas is something that we can continue to take forward after this moment has passed? Roland?
Really interesting concept, actually, as to how you strike the balance between biodiversity, on-site biodiversity, particularly for more urban schemes, where in fact there's a real economic imperative to maximize the density of development, essentially to get the most out of the land, and from in other sustainability respects, obviously ensure you're delivering as much housing as close to transport links and things as you can. And balancing, obviously, as I say, the delivery, the ability to deliver on-site biodiversity, which brings about social benefits and health and well-being benefits, as against actually delivering truly strategic conservation outcomes, which actually are best delivered typically on rural sites. And that is where we're seeing public policy develop. And part of the Environment Bill not only brings about the requirement to see a 10% net gain of biodiversity on development sites, but also this principle of nature recovery networks, where actually there will be a more strategic approach to identifying essentially biodiversity opportunity mapping, so identifying parcels of land that have the greatest potential to deliver conservation outcomes, so linking existing habitats of conservation importance and things like that. So again, as I say, it's an issue that I'm sure we will see played out over the next several years, but they're both very important things. As I say, people having access to nature on their doorstep and the health and well-being benefits that brings about, but also then ensuring that we have sufficient resource to properly fund really truly strategic conservation projects at scale, which are probably the ones that have the greatest benefit in biodiversity terms and in conservation terms.
And that, I suppose, brings with it a need for diverse thinking in businesses to be able to have those conversations, come up with the concepts, and be able to deliver. It's got to be public policy driven, and I am pleased to see public policy evolving in what I think is the right direction. A lot of it is about creating the conditions in which a private market for these things can thrive. And certainly, for landowners and for developers to be pursuing these particular outcomes, you need to have that public policy framework that not only brings about the requirement, but ensures the regulation of, the flows of those goods, such that, as I say, you are able to deliver them very effectively and
cost efficiently as well. And again, that's one of the benefits of doing things at scale with strategic thinking, is so that you can do things very cost efficiently. And therefore, rather than coming up with lots of small ad hoc solutions that are simply delivered on site in not a desperately sustainable way, you're able to utilize the resource that is available far more effectively to create really significant outcomes on a much larger scale. And as I say, I do see us, thankfully heading in that direction with public policy.
Great. Hello, Dave.
I was just going to say that sometimes we've got to lead the way with policy sometimes as well. I mean, for example, all of our work is in town centres, usually close to transport nodes. We are completely passionate about delivering emission-free, car-free schemes. And sometimes we're pushing an uphill struggle with local authorities, honestly, who are saying we've got to deliver car parking spaces, car parking. And we're saying, absolutely not. This is close to a transport node. Car access rather than car ownership is much more important. And we can demonstrate the significant benefits that this will have in terms of air quality, in terms of better design. We want walkable places. But so sometimes we have to push policy as well, who tend to go down the very, well, this is how it's done. And we say, actually, no. We've got to push. We've got to have a different approach if we're going to make fundamental differences and fundamental changes to our environment.
Monica, I'd be keen to get a continental European view on that. Is this a UK issue that Roland and Holiday are talking about, or does it spread over to Stockholm too?
Well, we have an office in London as well, and I'm also one of the MDAs for Sadicon. So I think it's quite interesting to compare these two cities. And in some way, I believe that what we have here in Scandinavia is we have more a common knowledge within in the boroughs, such as a lot more architects and planners who are really and with that knowledge, I think you can have a more of a long-term perspective in planning in greater areas. And in Stockholm, the city of Stockholm owns more land than, for instance, London does, where in London is more privately owned, and that's of course another way how to tackle this issue. But at the same time, I believe that with good growth by design and all the things that that the GLA would like to do, I think there is also an ongoing conversation in how to create value in different ways. I mean, we have public practice in London, which is a great help, I think, to the local authorities, and that's another way how to get more skilled people into the planning process. And also, London is more of a negotiation city, while Stockholm is more planned city. So how do you negotiate this kind of values into the future? And how can, everybody benefit from that? So that's, again, about knowledge. But what it ends up to is also how do we use the public realm? And is it for everybody? Is it privately owned? Or is it owned by the community? And I think, though, as you started to ask this question about biodiversity, I think that we need this kind of, the public realm to be a part of this quality of life, and also to be, that can help us to have a city that is more inclusive and will be also more diverse. So the public realm is, of course, extremely important when it comes to create value, both social value, but also economic value.
It's quite a hard thing to get right, though, public realm, isn't it? And that many people have many different ideas about what makes public realm and who owns it, I suppose. So how do we negotiate over what public realm is and whose it is and who manages it and what it looks like?
I was just one thing to add to that. I think it's quite interesting, especially today, when we talk about this post-corona, the importance of being able to be outside somewhere close to where you live in your neighborhood, or to be able to have a decent playground outside. And I think that's also something that could be a part of that that discussion.
Sure. Roland?
Yeah, I mean, I think the concept of public realm is a really interesting thing, and some of the projects I work on, I'm working on one at the moment, which is absolutely huge strategic development site, which will deliver potentially 12,000 units and 5.5 million square feet of commercial space. And my role is actually helping them with their green infrastructure plan. And so as part of that, what we're looking at is, the need for public realm, but also then balancing that again with actually the conflict that exists with some forms of conservation particularly. So there is land in quite close proximity to this site that has very high conservation value, which is actually incompatible with broad public use. So as I say, that's something we're looking at very carefully there, is to try and ensure that we're creating very significant linear links and routes beyond the development site itself, but then having really high quality public realm that runs throughout the scheme itself, but then also with that land that is dedicated purely to deliver biodiversity benefits, and of course those biodiversity benefits are brought about across all of the site and the public realm as well. But as I say, recognizing that not all of that space can be dedicated to public use if you want to achieve the optimal range of outcomes that are necessary.
Olade, for First Space, how do you look at public realm, and how do you define it?
I suppose first things for us is that's where we start when we design our schemes, because actually that's the bit that glues everything together. The buildings are the buildings. They will do what they need to do, but actually the public space is the most important part, because that's where most people interact with a development or a place. So that's one. And the words we always use when we talk about public realm is that it has to be inviting, it has to be open, always open, and importantly, it has to be democratic, and it has to feel almost civic-like in its purpose. It has to be a place where people can come together, can collide, can you can actually sit there and no one's going to tell you to go away. It has to have that role, and actually that cuts across whoever's using that public space, whether you're a 2-year-old or an 80-year-old, because actually we all have a need for that public space, and thinking about what's in that space to cater for a broad range of people can be quite difficult. So that's why we start there early, and we spend a lot of time actually talking to people, talking to who are the potential users. So we go into because we want the local community to use it, so we go and talk to them about what type of spaces do you want, how do you think you're going to use this space. And I think we always end up with a very flexible space, a space that can flex. Whether it's 8 o'clock in the morning for yoga or 3 o'clock in the afternoon for after school club use. So it has to be a space. The flexibility, it has to be ingrained into it so that it can really flex for different uses. But as I said, fundamentally for us, it has to be open, inviting, and democratic. That's our view. Which
could be a challenge, I suppose, post COVID, couldn't it? If we want to, Monica, as you were alluding to, if we want to create places where people are coming together, colliding, as you said, Olade, we've got to think about that really differently, haven't we? And maybe we can use environmental measures, biodiversity, to help create open spaces, but safe open spaces.
Absolutely. I think there'll be a lot of thinking post-COVID, because I think there is a fundamental human desire to be close to one another. We work better when we're collaborating or we're engaging with one another. And I think I certainly haven't got my head around what that will look like when we are in a post-COVID world. And I think, agree with you, we'll have to use our very diverse thinking and thought to think about what that looks like in the future.
Fantastic. Monica, any thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think, as we talked earlier, I think also how dense can a city be? That's also the densification is a part of the biodiversity and the diversity of the cities. And I think that now, and if we also talk about post-COVID, I think, of course, it's the public space, but it's also the semi-private and semi-public, such as balconies, maybe as a new design element, that balconies will, and also the roof terraces. How can we use the roofs even better? And all kinds of where you can, where you will be able to get out or to be in the air. and see that you have daylight into the playgrounds. So daylight will be very, as it is for biodiversity, light is very needed, natural light. So maybe that kind of natural light is also needed in the built environment as much as the both private, semi-public and public space.
Fantastic. I just want to turn to some questions that I've got coming into me now, and one sort of reverts back to something that you were saying, Monica, about if we didn't have diversity. So the question is about what can we learn from the lack of diversity in real estate going forward that we can then put back into the sector?
Maybe, I don't know if you have seen Push the movie. There's another movie about the gentrification where, parts of the city is even closed, why there are only some sort of people living in one neighborhood. I think that when we look at this, we would like, of course, to have a possibility for a lot of people to be able to live close to each other with mixed income, really. So I suppose that, and that's again a big role from the public sector to ensure that it will be sort of mixed income, mixed use. But that's a very, very big question. And I also suppose that, or I know that you need to have a long-term perspective on this issue and see that that's really how to create both economic value at the end while you are creating social value. I think those two values goes hand in hand, really. Social value together with economic value.
Excellent. Olade, is that something you believe and agree with?
Wholly, 100% agree with that. I think for us, we've got to have mixed, multiple use places. Land is scarce, but we tend to focus on sole use, just residential or just a commercial place. And actually, if we want to create proper communities, we've got to diversify the offer. Even within the use, the commercial use, we've got to diversify that. It's not just about big, massive office floor plates. We've got to have smaller floor plates for smaller businesses. We've got to have much more startup spaces, incubator spaces. We've got to put all that into the mix because that's absolutely important to a proper economy. And similarly with residential, we can't just focus on building stuff and selling it. It's got to be, how can we provide different types of tenures to meet people at different points of their need, whether it is multi-generational living or elder living or rental offer. We've got to have a real mix because actually our society is diverse, but our real estate does not reflect that at all. So we've got to do much better.
Roland, you were nodding there.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree.
And now shaking your head.
Sorry, no, one of the points just to pick up on in terms of going back to this business of thinking strategically, and I think certainly very much applies to greenfield development, but I think also to brownfield development in urban areas. There's this point of trying, where we are looking to provide public goods like public realm, actually the ability for multiple schemes to share resources to provide something that is of at a meaningful scale and strategically located. So for example, I think people don't often consider the sustainability impact of we often think about sustainability as new residential units having good easy access to amenities like shops and schools, etc., medical facilities, but not necessarily so much to green space. And actually, what we see even in a city like Cambridge is people getting in their cars to go and drive 5 miles to go and walk their dog, on a daily basis in many cases. Now that is ridiculous. And what you can't expect is necessarily, individual small schemes to be, delivering strategic scale green space. So as I say, we need frameworks that allow resources to be pooled and actually to think, on a bigger scale to be able to deliver those sorts of public goods.
I think that's a really interesting point, and we sadly only have a few minutes left. So I want to focus in on that sort of question and get some good solid answers from all of you, which I know I will. Which is, if we do need that strategic framework in place to be able to deliver on this, to create true diversity in the huge sense of the word and true sustainability, what would be your one demand on government or individuals to enable that to be put in place? I'm going to start with you, Roland, as you put the question in my head.
Right.
So it's your fault.
I guess, I said early on, I think we are seeing policy moving in that direction. So I think the Environment Bill is a great start. Interestingly, when you actually talk to local planning authorities across the country, the stage that they're at in terms of recognising this coming and their thinking differs enormously. And so I think, as I say, we need a further push from central government in terms of that direction of policy, but then actually a more consistent adoption of that model across the country so that we can allow those private markets to develop. Because even though the framework is now there, we're still seeing too many small ad hoc solutions rather than, the intention of the policy being, this more strategic scale, much more efficient use of resource. So as I say, I think, direction of travel is right, but it's more about consistent implementation now, I think.
Fantastic. Thank you. Monica?
I think that's when you described Cambridge, I think it's what's quite interesting why, people are taking the car, because I thought walkability could be a good word to use in the future, and to say that, cities should be just walkable on long distance, meaning that walkability means that in not too far away, you've got to have like schools, you've got to have like certain amenities and shops and so on. So maybe after this post-COVID, people understand that they can walk more than take the car. And by that, they could also ask to have some parts closer to maybe where they live, the residential areas. So I think it's going to be very, very important while planning this, even in the suburbs, how you plan those suburbs to be more on walkable conditions and even cyclable, meaning that no cars. Because if we continue to plan our cities with cars, it will just go on and go on and go on. So we need to do that in a different way, especially outside, especially in the outskirts and in the suburbs.
Thank you. And last and by no means least, Olade.
I was just going to add that, through our work, we're working in Bristol, Brighton, Cambridge, etc. And we are privy to a lot of amazing work happening within the universities that's just not out in the public domain. And actually really harnessing some of that research and that knowledge could really help. So I think, from a strategic perspective, where the local authorities and the central government could get some of that academic understanding and use that to help, I think.
Excellent. So thank you so much. Another fascinating conversation, which we again have to finish too quickly, if only 30 minutes was longer. It's so great to have so many different voices and so many different approaches. And I think everyone can learn a great deal from this session and from the day in total. So please do join me, viewers, in thanking our panelists, Roland, Monica and Olade. So thank you again to everyone for listening in, watching, taking part by asking questions. It is time to call it a day on this session, but we will be back at 2:15 for our final session of the day, which is Eyes on the Horizon. Let's use this time wisely. Well, we'll be bringing together much of what we've learned today and be looking forward. But for now, I believe I have a short break to go for a wee. And I'll see you all back at 2:15. Thank you so much.
Bye.